On Christmas Eve, while the world decorated trees and poured champagne, Serafina Vale stood alone in a penthouse bathroom, staring at a pregnancy test that changed everything. 2 floors below, her husband's guests laughed and clinked glasses. 2 days from now, she would be gone. The divorce papers were already signed. The flight to London was already booked. And the man she once loved more than breathing, the man who had slowly, methodically, destroyed her from the inside out, had no idea she was carrying his child. What happens next will break your heart before it puts it back together. Drop your city in the comments and follow this story all the way to the end, because this one doesn't end where you think it does. Spam. The bathroom was white marble and silence. Serafina Vale stood at the vanity with both palms pressed flat against the cold stone edge, her eyes fixed on the thin plastic strip balanced across the soap dish. She had looked at it 17 times in the last 2 minutes. The result had not changed. 2 pink lines. She exhaled through her nose, slow, controlled, the kind of breath a person takes when they are trying very hard not to come apart in a room that does not belong to them anymore. The penthouse bathroom smelled like the cedar and bergamot candles she had bought 2 Christmases ago, back when she still believed that the right scent in the right room could make a marriage feel like a home. She had been wrong about a lot of things then. From 2 floors below, music drifted upward through the heated floors. Something orchestral, something Damien's event planner had selected because it conveyed the exact degree of wealth and sophistication that Damien Voss required all things in his orbit to convey. The annual Christmas Eve gathering, 40 guests, catered by a restaurant that had a 4-month wait list, bartenders in suits, a view of Manhattan that made people feel like they were standing at the edge of the world. Serafina had attended 6 of these parties as Damien's wife. This was not the 7th. She picked up the pregnancy test with 2 fingers, slipped it back into the pharmacy bag, and folded the top down twice. Then she tucked it inside the inner pocket of the carry-on bag sitting open on the bathroom floor between her feet, next to a rolled-up change of clothes and the novel she had been trying to finish for 4 months. She zipped the pocket closed. Her flight was at 11:50. It was currently 8:14. She straightened, looked at herself in the mirror for one long moment, dark circles, jaw tight, the kind of hollow expression that comes not from one bad night but from 3 years of slow erosion. And then she turned and walked back into the master bedroom. The bedroom was dim. She had turned off the overhead lights an hour ago and left only the lamp on the far nightstand burning. The bed was made. She had made it that morning out of habit, smoothing every corner with the same automatic care she had applied to everything in this apartment, this life, this marriage, long after it had stopped meaning anything. Muscle memory. The body continuing to tend a garden the mind had already abandoned. On the writing desk beside the window sat 2 items she had placed there with deliberate care before going into the bathroom. The first was a white envelope, sealed, with Damien's name written across the front in her handwriting. Inside were the divorce papers. Both copies, both signed. Her attorney had told her to mail them or file them electronically. Instead, she was leaving them here, because she needed Damien to find them and understand that she had made this decision inside his own home, on his own terms, in a space he had always controlled, and that she had walked out anyway. The second item was the pharmacy bag's twin. She had bought 2 tests. She had taken both. The second pregnancy test sat beside the envelope, still in its wrapper. She had considered leaving only the letter. She had considered leaving only the test. In the end, she left both, because she was done protecting him from the truth of what his choices had cost them. Serafina picked up her carry-on, slung it over one shoulder, and crossed the bedroom toward the door. She did not look back. The hallway outside the master suite was long and carpeted in a pale gray that cost more per square foot than most people paid in monthly rent. She walked it quickly, past the framed architectural photographs Damien had selected, past the closed door of what had once been talked about as a nursery, and then quietly stopped being talked about, past the alcove with the reading chair she had used constantly in the first year of their marriage, and barely touched since. At the end of the hall, a private elevator connected the residential floors to the building's lobby. She had used it hundreds of times. Tonight it felt different, the way every ordinary thing feels different when you are doing it for the last time and you know it. She pressed the button. The doors opened immediately. Inside the elevator, she watched the floor numbers descend and kept her breathing even and did not think about the look on Damien's face when he found the desk. She had spent 3 years trying to read his face, trying to decipher the signals beneath the stillness, trying to understand a man who had never once simply told her what he was thinking. She was done trying to read him. She was done trying to understand. The lobby was quiet. The doorman, Marcus, was at his station near the front entrance. He looked up when she stepped out of the elevator, and his expression did a small, complicated thing. A flicker of something she might have read as recognition if she had been paying closer attention. "Mrs. Voss." "Hi, Marcus?" She kept moving. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas." A pause. "You have a good trip." She stopped. She turned and looked at him. Marcus was 53 years old and had worked this building for 11 years. He was a man of careful discretion and zero drama. He had never said anything to her that crossed the line of professional courtesy. His face right now was neutral. Perfectly, professionally neutral. But she had spent enough time in this lobby, waiting for Damien to come home, that she knew the difference between Marcus not knowing something and Marcus choosing not to say it. "Thank you," she said, after a moment. She walked out into the cold. The black car she had arranged was waiting at the curb. Not the car service Damien used, not anyone connected to his office or his accounts. She had paid for this one herself, from the personal account she had quietly opened 8 months ago in her own name, with her own small savings, because there was a version of herself that had known for a long time that this moment was coming. The driver loaded her bag. She got in the back seat. The car pulled away from the building, and the Christmas lights strung along the street outside blurred through the tinted window into soft smears of red and gold. And she sat very still and watched them and felt nothing she could name. That was the worst part, she had decided. Not the grief, not the anger. Those were clean emotions, at least. They had weight and direction. What she felt right now was something more like static, the complete absence of signal after years of trying to receive one. She pulled out her phone. One unread message from her attorney confirming the filing timeline once the signed copies were delivered. One unread message from her college roommate in London, asking what time her flight landed. 2 missed calls from a number she did not recognize. She ignored all of it. Instead, she opened her phone's photo gallery and scrolled back, not thinking about it, just scrolling until she hit photographs from 3 years ago. A restaurant, a candlelit table, Damien across from her, and he was laughing. Actually laughing, unguarded, the way he almost never was in public. And she had taken the picture because she had wanted to preserve that version of him, the one she saw in fragments, the one that felt like a reward for her patience. She looked at that photograph for a long moment. Then she locked her phone and put it in her coat pocket and looked out the window at the city passing by. She had loved him. That was the part that didn't get simpler no matter how many times she turned it over. She had loved him with the kind of specificity that doesn't attach to a category of person, but to one actual, specific, irreplaceable human being. She had loved the way he took his coffee without sugar and then stole sips of hers when he thought she wasn't watching. She had loved the way he read physical newspapers, actual paper, and folded them into smaller and smaller rectangles until the story he was reading was a 2-inch square. She had loved the particular silence of being in a room with him when neither of them was performing anything. But love, she had learned, does not keep a marriage together any more than good intentions keep a ship from sinking. You also need someone who shows up. Someone who tells you the truth. Someone who, when the pressure builds and the fear gets loud, does not turn you into a problem to be managed from a safe distance. Damien had managed her for 3 years. Now she was done being managed. The airport was loud and bright in the way airports are always loud and bright at night. A particular fluorescent urgency that has nothing to do with what time it is and everything to do with the idea that somewhere, someone is always in transit. She checked in at the counter, cleared security, found her gate. The terminal was decorated for Christmas. Artificial trees, tinsel wound around the railings, a speaker system playing carols that the crowd noise regularly swallowed. Her flight was boarding in 90 minutes. She found a seat near the window and sat with her carry-on in her lap and watched the planes on the tarmac and tried to imagine what London felt like. She had been there twice, briefly, for work. She had a contact there, a gallery owner named Iris who had been asking her for 2 years to come help curate an exhibition series. She had a place to stay, a short-term rental, already paid for the first month. She had a plan, or the skeleton of one. She had not planned for 2 pink lines. She pressed her hand flat against her abdomen, just for a second, and then moved it away. Not yet. She couldn't think about that yet. Get on the plane first, get across the ocean, Get somewhere that is not here. Then think. She bought a cup of coffee from a kiosk near the gate and sat back down and did not think about the fact that she had left a pregnancy test on Damien Voss's desk on Christmas Eve. She thought about the view from Iris's apartment, which she had seen in photographs. A canal, narrow brick buildings, morning light that apparently came in sideways and turned everything amber. She thought about waking up in a place that had no memory of her marriage, no physical evidence of the years she had spent trying to hold something together that had been quietly disintegrating at its core. She thought about starting over. She thought about the specific, terrifying freedom of having no idea what happened next. Her phone buzzed. A text from the unknown number that had called twice earlier. She stared at it. The message was 5 words. I know where you are. She sat very still. Her first thought was that it was him. Her second thought was that it couldn't be, because Damien was at the party 2 floors below the desk where she had left the envelope and the test, and there was no way he had found them yet. And even if he had, Damien Voss did not send 5-word texts. He summoned. He appeared. He stood in a doorway and made the air in a room feel different. Her third thought arrived before she could reach her fourth. The text was not from Damien. She typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared. Then, "Someone who knows what your husband has been hiding." She lowered the phone slowly. Her coffee was getting cold. Around her the terminal hummed and shuffled, and a child somewhere was crying about something, and 2 men in suits were arguing over a shared armrest with the focused hostility of people who had been traveling for too long. Ordinary airport noise. Ordinary Christmas Eve chaos. She looked at her phone again. The 3 dots had disappeared. No follow-up message. She stood up, sat back down, stood up again and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the tarmac and thought carefully about what to do with the information she had just received, which was almost no information at all. Just a hook, just enough to open a door and see if she'd walk through it. She did not walk through it. She went back to her seat, put her phone face down on the seat beside her, and picked up her novel. She read the same paragraph 4 times. The boarding announcement came at 11:20, Zone 1 first, then Zone 2. She was Zone 2. She got to her feet, gathered her bag, joined the back of the forming line. The line moved slowly. She inched forward. The gate agent scanned the boarding pass of the man in front of her, then the woman in front of her. Then she was at the front. She held out her phone. The gate agent reached for the scanner. And then someone called her name. Not shouted, not desperate, just said it. Serafina, in a voice that she had spent 3 years of her life learning the particular frequencies of. The way you learn a piece of music you've played so many times, you can hear it in your sleep. She turned. Damien Voss was standing 30 feet away in the middle of the terminal concourse, still in the dark suit he had worn to his own party. No coat. His tie loosened, his jaw set in a way that meant he had been moving fast and then made himself stop. He looked like a man who had run a mile and was using every available resource to appear as though he had not. His eyes were on her face. Just her face. Like nothing else in the terminal existed. In his right hand, held loosely, was the white envelope. In his left hand, held less loosely, held, she noticed with a shock that moved through her chest like cold water, was the pregnancy test. He had found them. He had found them and come here. And it was 11:22 on Christmas Eve, and her flight was boarding right now, and he was standing there like the answer to a question she had stopped asking. "Ma'am?" The gate agent was waiting. Serafina did not move. Damien did not move either. He just stood there, 30 feet away, and looked at her, and let the distance between them be what it was. A distance that held 3 years of damage and silence and the ghost of something that had once been real. And he did not close it without her permission. That was the thing that got her. Not the running, not the fact that he had come. The fact that after everything, after all of it, he still knew that she needed to choose whether to let him cross the distance, that he still knew that about her. "Ma'am, I need to scan." "1 second, Serafina said. She lowered her phone. She looked at Damien Voss across 30 feet of Christmas Eve terminal, with his suit and his loosened tie and her divorce papers in one hand and the proof of their unborn child in the other, and she felt the static in her chest shift. Not clear, not clean, but different. Like a frequency changing, like something beneath the noise trying to resolve into a signal. She did not board the plane. She stepped out of line. The gate agent made a small sound of frustration. The line behind her shuffled to fill the gap. Serafina walked toward Damien with her carry-on over her shoulder, and her cold coffee in her hand, and her heart doing something she could not immediately categorize. And when she reached him, she stopped with 2 feet of air between them and looked at his face. Really looked at it, the way she had stopped letting herself look at it somewhere in the second year. And what she saw there was not the careful blankness he wore to board meetings and galas and negotiations. What she saw was fear, not performed fear, not strategic vulnerability, actual, unfiltered, open-faced fear. Damien Voss was afraid. She had never, in 3 years of marriage, seen him afraid. "You weren't supposed to find those yet," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I went upstairs to check on you." His voice was low. "You weren't there." "I know." "How long have you known?" He looked down at the test in his hand, then back up at her. 2 days. Something moved across his face. 2 days, he repeated, and the words came out with a specific weight that told her he understood exactly what that meant, that she had known for 2 days and had still signed those papers, still packed that bag, still walked out. "Damien, I'm not going to beg you to stay." His jaw was tight. "I know I don't have the right to do that." "Then why are you here?" He looked at her for a long moment. The terminal noise went on around them. The carols, the crying child, the loudspeaker announcing a delayed flight. And he stood in the middle of all of it and said quietly, with a precision that told her he had been thinking about how to say this since the moment he found the desk. "Because I have been keeping something from you for almost 2 years. Something that explains, not excuses, explains everything that happened to us. And you deserve to know what it is before you get on that plane." He paused. "And because if you're carrying my child, I will not let you fly across an ocean without at least asking you to hear me out." Serafina looked at the envelope in his hand, then at the test, then at his face. "You have until they close the gate," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not relief. Not yet. Something more like a man who has been standing at the edge of a cliff for a very long time and has finally decided to step back. "That's enough," he said. "That's enough time." But it wasn't. Because what Damien Voss said in the next 12 minutes, standing in Gate B7 of JFK International Airport on Christmas Eve, while the last call for Flight 447 to London echoed over their heads, was not something that could be processed in 12 minutes. It was not something that could be processed in 12 days. It cracked the foundation of everything she had decided about her marriage, about him, about the 3 years of carefully constructed conclusions she had used to justify walking away. And when the gate agent made the final boarding announcement, and Serafina Vale stood in Terminal 4 with the ruins of her certainty scattered around her feet like broken glass, she realized something that terrified her more than any of it. She did not get on the plane, and she had no idea what that meant yet. But when Damien reached out his hand, slowly, carefully, the way you extend your hand toward something you are not sure will let you touch it, she looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked up at him, and in his eyes, past the fear and the discipline and the years of carefully managed distance, she saw something she had spent the last year telling herself she had imagined. She saw the man she had married. She saw him still there. Whether that was enough, whether anything he could say or do was enough, she genuinely did not know. But when the last boarding call faded over the speakers and the gate door began to close and Damien stood there with his hand out and his face open and 3 years of unanswered questions finally taking shape between them, Serafina Vale made a choice. She did not take his hand, not yet, but she did not walk away either. "Tell me everything," she said. "All of it. No edits." Damien exhaled, a long, slow breath that sounded like something he had been holding for a very long time. "Okay," he said. "Okay." And what he said next, what he finally, after 2 years of silence, actually told her, was worse than she had imagined, and more complicated than she had feared. And the reason he had done what he had done was not the reason she had constructed in her head across 3 years of unanswered dinners and empty beds, and a marriage that had slowly turned into a beautiful, suffocating lie. The reason changed everything. It didn't fix anything, but it changed everything. She stood in Terminal 4 while Flight 447 to London pushed back from the gate without her, and she listened to her husband tell her the truth for the first time. And somewhere beneath the grief and the anger and the exhaustion, in a place she had not visited in a very long time, something that had gone very quiet began. Faint, uncertain, dangerous, to stir. Her phone buzzed once. She ignored it. The unknown number. 5 new words. You should have gotten on that plane. The airport had a bar called Threshold. Serafina noticed the name when Damien steered her toward it, 2 fingers barely touching her elbow, not gripping, just indicating direction the way you might guide someone through a crowded room when you're not sure you have the right to actually touch them. She let him. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because her legs had gone slightly unreliable and the bar had chairs, or maybe because the name felt accurate. Threshold. The place between 2 things, neither one nor the other. They took a corner table, away from the televisions and the cluster of stranded holiday travelers drinking their delays away. A server came. Damien ordered sparkling water without looking at the menu. Serafina ordered the same, and the server left, and they sat across from each other in the particular silence of 2 people who have just said things that cannot be unsaid and are now figuring out what comes next. Her phone was face down on the table between them. He looked at it once. Someone texted you, he said. At the gate, I saw your face. Unknown number. What did they say? She turned the phone over and showed him the messages, watched his face while he read them. The careful blankness he usually wore to things like this, the executive neutrality, the boardroom mask, didn't fully materialize this time. What she saw instead was something tighter, something that moved behind his eyes the way something moves in deep water when you drop a stone in. He set the phone down without touching it. How long have you had contact with this number? I haven't. Those are the only messages. Did you respond? Once. I asked who it was. He nodded once, slowly. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at her with the kind of look that meant he was doing a calculation. Not about her, she understood now, but about something adjacent to her, something she didn't have the full picture of yet. That look. She had hated that look for 3 years without understanding what it actually meant. Tell me, she said. You said you would tell me everything. I will. Then start. The sparkling water arrived. He waited for the server to leave. Then he put both forearms on the table and looked at her directly. Not the sideways, managed eye contact he had defaulted to across 3 years of dinner tables and careful conversations, but direct, full. The way he had looked at her in the early months, before whatever happened happened. His name is Rowan Steele, Damien said. He was my chief operations officer for 4 years. I trusted him more than I have ever trusted anyone in a professional context. I gave him access to everything, accounts, contacts, infrastructure, all of it. Serafina waited. About 2 years ago, I started finding inconsistencies. Small ones at first. Redirected funds in amounts that wouldn't trigger internal review. Contractors being paid for work that didn't exist. I had my financial team run a quiet audit. He paused. What they found was not a man skimming money. It was a man who had been systematically building a parallel operation inside my company for years, using my resources, using my reputation as cover. For what? For things I will not put my name on. He said it flatly, no performance. Things that, if they were ever publicly linked to Voss Capital, would have destroyed not just the company, but every person connected to it. A beat, including you. The bar noise continued around them. Ice in glasses, low conversations, a television in the corner replaying a Christmas Eve news segment. When I confronted him, Damien said, he did not deny it. He told me that if I moved against him, he would release documentation implicating me in everything he had built, fabricated documentation. Detailed enough and specific enough that by the time anyone established the truth, the damage would be done. His jaw tightened. And then he told me something else. What? Damien looked at her. He told me he had people watching you. The sentence landed without drama. No music cue. Just those 5 words sitting on the table between them like something heavy and cold. Watching me, she said. He had someone on you. Your movements, your routines, where you went, who you saw. He described your Wednesday morning run in Riverside Park. He described the coffee shop on Amsterdam Avenue where you went after. He described what you ordered. Damien's voice was even, but something in it was costing him. He knew things that I had never told him. That meant someone had been physically tracking you, and had been doing it long enough to have a routine mapped. Serafina sat very still. He told me the arrangement was simple. As long as I stayed quiet and stayed compliant, you were safe. The moment I moved against him, or went to anyone, or in any way threatened the operation he was running, he stopped, started again. He made it very clear what the alternative looked like. She picked up her glass, set it down without drinking from it. So you said nothing, she said. I said nothing. To anyone. To anyone. Including me. The two words sat between them. Including you, he said. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that he didn't try to fill the silence, which was either discipline or guilt or both. You decided, she said slowly, that the correct response to someone threatening my life was to keep me in the dark about it. I decided the safest response. I'm not asking about safe. Her voice came out harder than she expected. I'm asking about correct. I'm asking whether it occurred to you, at any point in the 2 years you were managing this situation, to tell your wife that her life was being used as leverage against you. If I had told you, I would have known. She cut him off cleanly. I would have understood why you were distant, why you stopped coming to bed, why you canceled every trip and rerouted every conversation and turned yourself into someone I barely recognized. I would have understood, Damien, instead of spending 2 years deciding I had done something wrong. Instead of spending 2 years trying to figure out which version of me you had gotten tired of. Something crossed his face, something that looked like it hurt. Good, she thought, and then immediately felt tired of herself for thinking it. I thought I was protecting you, he said. You were managing me. There's a difference. Serafina, don't. She held up one hand. I'm not finished. She took a breath. Did it work? Whatever you did, the silence, the compliance, did it work? He hesitated. Damien. I made contact with federal investigators 14 months ago. She stared at him. Quietly, he said. Through an attorney who had no traceable connection to me. I gave them everything. The documentation, the financial trails, the names of Steele's contacts. I wore a wire in 3 meetings. I gave them enough to build a case that couldn't be dismantled. His voice was measured, but underneath it was something exhausted, something that had been carrying weight for a long time. 3 months ago, Steele was indicted. His operation was dismantled. He is currently awaiting trial, and the terms of his cooperation agreement prohibit any contact with anyone connected to my company or my personal life. Serafina looked at the table, then back up at him. The surveillance, she said. The people watching me. Identified and removed. 14 months ago, when the federal involvement began. I had a private security firm sweep your routines without your knowledge. I know that's... He stopped. I know. You had people watching the people watching me. Yes, and you still didn't tell me. By that point, the habit of not telling you was... He stopped again. Something on his face shifted. That's not an excuse. I know that's not an excuse. I'm just trying to explain how the silence became its own thing. How I told myself I would tell you when it was over, and then it kept not being over, and the distance between us kept getting wider. And at some point I think I understood that the silence had done damage I didn't know how to face. She was quiet. The bar was still noisy. The television had moved to a weather segment. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows beside their table, a plane was taxiing toward a runway, its lights blinking slow and patient in the dark. Her flight, or another flight that looked like hers. The texts, she said. He had been watching her face carefully. The shift in her focus brought him back to it immediately. What about them? Someone who knows what your husband has been hiding. She looked at him. Steele? No. He said it without hesitation, which meant he had already thought about it. Steele has too much to lose. The terms of his cooperation? Then who? Someone in his network who wasn't swept up in the indictment. Someone who knows enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be prosecutable. He pulled out his own phone. I need to make a call. Right now? Right now. Right? She watched him dial, watched him wait, jaw tight, through 2 rings. Then someone picked up, and Damien said without preamble, I need a trace on 2 incoming messages sent to my wife's cell in the last 40 minutes. Unknown number. Yes, tonight. He gave her number. He listened. He said, call me back in 10 minutes. He hung up. Who was that? She asked. Someone I trust. That's not an answer. It's the answer I have right now. He met her eyes. I'm not keeping anything else from you. I just need 10 minutes before I have more to give you. She studied him. This was the thing about Damien Voss that had never resolved itself cleanly into the narrative she had built about him over the last year. He was not a man who was easy to dismiss, not because he was charming, he wasn't particularly, but because there was a quality of presence to him that forced a certain kind of attention, like standing near something that generates its own gravity. It had drawn her in 3 years ago, and it unnerved her now, because she had spent the last several months getting very comfortable with her decision, very settled into the architecture of her exit, and he was standing in the middle of it like a variable she had not accounted for. The nursery, she said. He went still. The closed door. The room at the end of the hall that we stopped talking about in the first year. She kept her voice neutral. You said, at the gate, you said you'd been planning, even while things were falling apart. Yes. Explain that. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, There's a property outside the city. I bought it 8 months ago. I'll take you there if you'll let me. The explanation lands differently if you see it. I don't want to see something. I want you to tell me. Sarah. Don't call me that. The name landed between them like a line drawn in a floor. He stopped. Something in his face recalibrated. I built a studio, he said quietly. On the property. A north-facing room with skylights, the way you described once, years ago, when you talked about the kind of space you'd want to work in if you had a choice. You described it once at dinner, in the first month we were together. You probably don't remember. She remembered. She remembered exactly. I had a nursery designed, he said. Not because I knew. I didn't know until tonight. I had it designed because even when I was doing everything wrong, even when I was so far inside the problem that I couldn't see past it, I was still thinking about what I was trying to get back to. He paused. About who I was trying to get back to. She looked at him. Her chest hurt. She was furious at her chest for hurting. You should have told me, she said. The anger in her voice had changed texture. Less sharp, more ragged. Worse, in a way. All of it. Everything. You should have trusted me with it. Yes. I would have stayed. The sentence left her before she could stop it. She felt it leave, felt the specific vulnerability of it the moment it was out. Damien didn't move, didn't exploit it, didn't lean into it. He sat with it the way you sit with something that cost you to receive. I know, he said. Don't. She pressed her fingers against her eyes, dropped her hand. I don't know why I said that. Because it's true. Damien, I know. He exhaled. I'm not using it. I know. She reached for her water, drank some of it. Outside, the plane she had been watching completed its taxi and aligned with the runway. She watched it begin to move, watched it accelerate, watched it lift. Gone. 2 weeks, he said. She looked at him. That's what I'm asking for. Not forever, not a decision. 2 weeks. Come to the property with me, let me show you what I've been building, and if at the end of 2 weeks you want to file those papers and get on any flight going anywhere, I will personally drive you to the airport. You're negotiating with me. I'm asking. There's a difference. Yes, he said. There is. And I'm asking. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the 2 pink lines, about the gallery in London and the canal view and the amber morning light that would never now look the way she had imagined it, about the unknown number that had told her she should have gotten on that plane, about a room at the end of a hallway that she had walked past 100 times without knowing what it meant, about the look on his face at the gate, the fear, the particular, real, unmanaged fear. She had married him for the specific person underneath the power and the discipline and the controlled exterior. She had spent 3 years losing access to that person, and she had made her peace with the loss, or thought she had, until he showed up in a terminal at 11:20 on Christmas Eve with her divorce papers in one hand and the proof of his own recklessness in the other, and looked at her with that face. 2 weeks, she said. He waited. If you lie to me once, about anything, anything small, anything you decide I can't handle, I leave. Understood. And the person who texted me. I want to know who it is. You'll know before we leave this airport. His phone rang. He answered it, listened for 90 seconds, said nothing, and hung up. He set the phone on the table. The expression on his face had changed. What? She said. The number that texted you. He looked at her. It's registered to a prepaid phone purchased in cash, untraceable, but the texts were sent from a cell tower 3 blocks from this airport. She absorbed that. Whoever sent those messages, she said slowly, was here. They were close enough to know I was at this airport tonight. Yes. Which means they knew I was leaving. Yes. How? He looked at her. In his eyes, behind the control, she saw something she had not seen there since the beginning. Not fear this time. Something colder and more focused than fear. I don't know yet, he said, but the way he said it, the particular flatness of it, the way his hands had gone very still on the table, told her that not knowing yet was a specific temporary condition, that the machinery behind his eyes was already working on it, that whoever had sent those messages had made a significant tactical error in sending them. Serafina picked up her phone, read the messages again. You should have gotten on that plane. She thought about what it meant that someone had known she was at this airport, that someone had known about Damien's secrets, that someone had wanted her gone badly enough to send an anonymous warning on Christmas Eve. And then a thought arrived that she had not expected. What if the warning wasn't a threat? What if whoever sent those messages had been trying to protect her? She looked at Damien across the table. He was watching her face the way he watched things when he was working a problem, not with the managed blankness, but with the focus, the specific, unguarded focus he brought to things that mattered. She thought, I don't know who you are yet. I thought I did. I spent 3 years building a picture of you, and I think most of it was wrong, and that is either the most devastating thing I have ever discovered or the most... Her phone buzzed. The unknown number again. One new message. She turned the phone so he could see it at the same time she read it. 4 words. He hasn't told you everything. He hadn't told her everything. Serafina read it twice. Then she set the phone face down on the table with a precise, deliberate movement, the way you set down something you are not yet ready to deal with but cannot afford to ignore. Damien was already on his feet, not panicked. Damien Voss did not panic. She had come to understand that this was simply not a mode available to him, but moving. He had his phone out and was dialing before she could ask who, and when the call connected, he said 2 words. We're compromised, and then listened for 15 seconds and said, the airport bar. Yes, now, and hung up. Who are you calling? She asked. His name is Calvin Marsh. He's been handling my security since the federal investigation began. You have a security handler? Yes. That you never told me about. He looked at her. I'm telling you now. You're telling me now because someone just texted me that you're still lying. I'm telling you now because things just changed and you need to know who's coming. He sat back down, but he didn't settle. He sat at the front edge of the chair, weight forward, the way people sit when they are prepared to move. Calvin is going to want to see those messages. And then what? And then we figure out who's sending them. She looked at him. Is there something you haven't told me? Serafina, answer the question. He was quiet for 3 seconds. 3 seconds was a long time for Damien. 3 seconds meant something was happening behind those eyes that he was choosing how to phrase, and the choosing was costing him something. There is something, he said carefully, that I have been trying to determine the right time to tell you. The bar noise receded. Not literally. The televisions and the ice and the stranded travelers were all still there. But something in her attention narrowed until the periphery simply stopped registering. There is no right time, she said. There is right now. Calvin should be here. Damien. Her voice dropped low. Not soft. Low the way temperatures drop. If you make me wait one more time for information I should have had 2 years ago, I will walk out of this bar and I will not be coming back. He looked at her. Then he said, Rowan Steele didn't act alone. She waited. Inside my organization, before the indictment, he had a partner. Someone who fed him operational intelligence. Someone who had access to internal communications, to security rotations, to my personal calendar. He paused. Someone I have not been able to identify with certainty. With certainty, she repeated. Meaning you have a suspicion. Meaning I have a name that I cannot yet prove. Give me the name. He looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she could see the specific reluctance in it. Not the reluctance of a man protecting himself, but the reluctance of a man who understands that what he's about to say will do damage regardless of whether it's true. Marcus, he said. She heard the word, processed it. Marcus, she said, as in our doorman, as in the man who has worked that building for 11 years and knew every pattern of our life. His voice was steady but tight. As in the man who watched you leave tonight and said, specifically, have a good trip, not Merry Christmas, not take care, have a good trip, as if he knew. Lots of people knew I was leaving, she said. But the cold thing was already moving through her chest because she had noticed it too. She had noticed it in the lobby and then explained it away, and she was not someone who explained things away without reason, and the reason she had done it was that she had not wanted one more thing to be wrong about. How many people knew your exact flight tonight? Damien asked. She thought about it, her attorney, her college roommate in London, the car service she had booked. The car service, she said. Which company? She named it. Damien's expression did not change, but his jaw moved once, a small compression, the kind that happens when something you already suspected is confirmed. That company's dispatch software was flagged 18 months ago as a potential data vulnerability in the security audit, he said. I had no grounds to act on it. I noted it and monitored it. You monitored my movements through a car service company. I monitored a potential security liability that happened to be adjacent to your movements. He paused. I know how that sounds. It sounds like surveillance. It was protection. Damien. She leaned forward. You have been conducting a parallel life for 2 years, a hidden one. You have had people tracking threats to me that I didn't know existed, through systems I didn't know you were monitoring, with the help of people I didn't know you trusted, and this whole time I thought the problem was that you had stopped loving me. Something moved across his face, raw and fast, and then gone. The problem, he said quietly, was that I loved you too much to think clearly. A man appeared at the edge of their table, 40s, compact, a face that was professionally unremarkable. The kind of face that belongs in a room without drawing any particular attention to itself. He was wearing a dark jacket and carrying nothing. He did not introduce himself. He sat in the third chair, pulled it close, and said to Damien without looking at Serafina, Phone. Damien handed it over. Hers too. Serafina looked at the man. You're Calvin. Yes, ma'am. You've been managing my husband's security for over a year without my knowledge. Yes, ma'am. And now you want my phone. I want to trace those messages before whoever sent them goes dark. He met her eyes briefly. Direct, unbothered, the look of someone who had long ago stopped apologizing for the nature of his work. You can have it back in 2 minutes. She handed it over. He worked quickly, without explaining what he was doing, and she watched his hands and thought about Marcus at the lobby desk saying, have a good trip in that careful, professional voice, and the specific way she had chosen not to examine it. She thought about Damien buying a property 8 months ago, building a studio, designing a nursery, running a parallel life in the direction of something she had been walking away from. Calvin set both phones on the table. The messages came from a device registered to a woman named Delia Shan, he said. She's a former federal contractor. She did investigative research for the DOJ field office that handled Steele's case. He paused. She was removed from the case 11 months ago for unauthorized contact with a witness. Damien was very still. Which witness? He said. Calvin looked at him. You? The word sat between the three of them. Serafina watched her husband's face go through something she could not fully read. Not shock, not quite, but something in the same neighborhood. Something that carried the specific weight of a thing you were afraid might be true becoming confirmed. Who is she? Serafina asked. Calvin answered before Damien could. She's been conducting a parallel investigation into Steele's network for the past 8 months, privately, off the books. She believes the official case missed something, someone. He paused. A second partner, higher up than Steele, someone who has not been identified or indicted. The bar had gotten louder. More stranded travelers, more holiday chaos. A group near the door was singing something badly, and she's been trying to warn me, Serafina said. Not a question. That's what it looks like, Calvin said, because she thinks the second partner is someone connected to Damien. Calvin glanced at Damien. The glance was brief and carried information. Tell her, Damien said. Calvin turned back to Serafina. There's a name that's been surfacing in Delia Shan's private research. Someone inside the federal investigation itself, who may have been feeding information back to Steele's network during the prosecution process. Someone who would have known about Mr. Voss's cooperation, who would have had access to case strategy, who would have been in a position to warn Steele's remaining contacts before the indictment landed. He paused. And who would have known that if Serafina Vale left the country tonight, Damien Voss would be isolated and exposed? She looked at Damien. You know who it is. I have a name, he said. I don't have proof. That's the second time you've said that tonight. Her voice was flat. Give me the name anyway. Nathan Pryor, he said. He was the lead federal prosecutor on Steele's case. She absorbed that. The man who prosecuted Steele, she said, was working with Steele. Was potentially working with whoever was above Steele. Yes. And this is what you haven't told me. I've known about Pryor for 6 weeks. I've been trying to get Delia Shan's research through a back channel that doesn't trigger Pryor's attention before we have enough to act. If I move too soon, he buries it, she said. He buries it, destroys the evidence, and walks. Damien's hands were flat on the table. And whoever was above Steele walks with him. And nothing is ever actually over. Serafina sat with that. Outside the bar, the terminal had shifted into its late-night register. The deep hours reduced population, the particular exhaustion of an airport after midnight on a holiday. Cleaning crews, a few solo travelers asleep in chairs. The Christmas decorations looked different at this hour, more exposed, less festive than intended. She picked up her water, drank the rest of it. What does Delia Shan want? She asked. Presumably to make contact, Calvin said. The messages to you were an escalation. She's been trying to reach Mr. Voss directly for weeks and being blocked. Blocked by who? By me, Calvin said without apology. Unauthorized contacts from former federal contractors who were removed from active cases are a security liability until proven otherwise. And now? Now she's apparently decided that going through you was the alternative. He paused. Which tells me she's either desperate or she's found something she believes is time-sensitive. Serafina looked at Damien. Call her. We don't have her number. She has mine, Serafina said. She picked up her phone, found the unknown contact, typed, This is Serafina. Tell me what you know. Then she looked up at the two men watching her and said, I am not a variable in this. I am not a person to be protected by being kept in the dark. Are we clear? Calvin looked at Damien. Damien said, We're clear. Her phone buzzed within 40 seconds. The response was not a text. It was an address, a parking structure 2 terminals over, level 3. And then, come alone, both of you. No security. Calvin started to object. No, Serafina said. He looked at her. She reached out to me, Serafina said. Not to him, not to you. She went around every wall you built, Calvin, specifically because she didn't trust the security apparatus surrounding my husband. If we show up with a detail, she goes dark and we lose whatever she's found. She looked at Damien. You said 2 weeks. You said no more managing me. This is where that starts. Damien looked at Calvin for a long moment. Something passed between them. Not a debate exactly, more like a final check. Then he said to Calvin, Stay here. Calvin's expression said several things, none of them agreement, but he stayed. The parking structure was cold and smelled of exhaust and concrete and the particular staleness of enclosed spaces that never fully exchanged their air. Level 3 was nearly empty, a holiday weekend, most cars gone. The fluorescent tubes overhead running at that particular hum that makes the light feel less like light and more like the memory of it. They found her at the far end of the level, beside a gray sedan with a rental sticker on the bumper. She was around 40, sharp-faced, dark circles that had the quality of permanence rather than a single bad night. She was wearing a coat that was too thin for the temperature, and she had been watching them approach from 20 feet away with the careful attention of someone who had gotten very practiced at assessing whether she was about to be in danger. She looked at Damien first, then at Serafina. Then she said to Serafina specifically, "Thank you for coming." "Tell me what you found," Serafina said. No pleasantries, no preamble. Delia Shan seemed to appreciate that. She opened the back door of the sedan and pulled out a manila folder and held it out. Damien reached for it. She pulled it back slightly. "I need you to understand something before you open that," she said. "What's in this folder changes the shape of everything you think you know about the case. It doesn't just implicate Pryor, it documents something that happened before Pryor, before the indictment, before the cooperation agreement, that affects the terms under which Voss Capital's cooperation was arranged." She paused. "It affects whether certain protections you were promised are actually legally valid." Damien's hand was still extended. "Give it to me," he said. She handed it over. He opened it. Serafina watched his face. She had become practiced at watching his face in the course of this night, in a way she had stopped being during the marriage. Watching for the real thing, beneath the management, beneath the discipline. What she saw move across it now was not the careful blankness. It was not even the raw fear she had seen at the gate. What she saw was the specific expression of a man reading something that dismantles a structure he spent 2 years building, in real time, one line at a time. He read for 90 seconds. Then he closed the folder. Pryor wasn't just feeding information to Steele's network, he said. His voice was very quiet. He was in contact with them before I came forward, before I made the decision to cooperate. He looked at Delia Shan. He knew I was going to cooperate before I contacted the DOJ. "Yes," she said. "Which means the DOJ contact I went through was already compromised," she said. "The attorney you used to make anonymous contact with the investigation, Pryor had flagged that attorney as a likely intermediary for potential Voss cooperation 6 weeks before you reached out. When you made contact, Pryor knew within 48 hours. The parking structure hummed around them. The wire I wore," Damien said. 3 meetings. Yes." Delia's voice was not unkind. The recordings were partially manipulated before they entered the formal record. Not enough to be obvious, enough to be strategically useful if someone needed to revisit the terms of your cooperation agreement in a future proceeding. Someone meaning Pryor. Someone meaning whoever Pryor works for. Pryor is a mechanism. He's not the architecture. Serafina looked at Damien. His jaw was set. His eyes were on the folder in his hands. She could see the calculation happening, the rapid, silent inventory of everything this changed, everything this threatened, every protection he had believed he had secured, and that was apparently constructed on a foundation that someone had been quietly undermining from the beginning. 2 years. 2 years of sacrifice and silence, and a marriage that had broken under the weight of a secret he was carrying. And the protection that secret was supposed to buy was not protection at all. It was a controlled demolition with a delayed timer. "The cooperation agreement," she said. "If it was compromised..." "He's exposed," Delia said flatly. Everything Voss Capital was insulated from under the terms of the agreement, the parallel liability, the civil exposure, the reputational documentation Steele had fabricated. None of those protections hold if the agreement itself was tainted from the start. "Can it be challenged?" Serafina asked. "Yes. But a challenge goes through the court, through the formal record, through a process that Pryor and whoever he reports to have had 14 months to prepare for." She paused. "Unless someone files the right documents with the right evidence in the right jurisdiction before Pryor knows the folder exists." Damien looked up from the folder. "How long do we have?" he said. Delia looked at her watch. "Pryor's office opens at 8 a.m., she said. "I've had surveillance on his home for 3 days. He received a courier package tonight at 9:15 p.m. I don't know what was in it, but his behavior afterward changed significantly. He made 6 calls in 40 minutes. He has not left the house since." She met Damien's eyes. "My read is that someone in Steele's remaining network made contact. My read is that they know the folder exists, which means they know I'm here." She paused. "Which means we have until 8 a.m. to file, or we have nothing." Serafina looked at the time on her phone. 12:47 a.m. 7 hours and 13 minutes. She looked at Damien. His face was the face of a man standing at the bottom of something very deep, looking up at a rim of light that was not getting closer. But it was also... And this was the thing. This was the thing that she could not dismiss. The face of a man who was not running, who was not managing, who was not calculating the angle of retreat. He was standing in a freezing parking structure on Christmas Eve with the ruins of 2 years of careful strategy in his hands, and he was standing still. That was what she held on to as they moved. The three of them went back through the terminal at a pace that was not quite running. The deliberate fast walk of people who need to cover ground without triggering the particular attention that running in an airport triggers. Delia was ahead, phone already out, navigating something. Damien was beside Serafina, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him despite the cold they'd just come in from, and Calvin fell in behind them the moment they cleared the parking structure entrance, because Calvin had not actually stayed at the bar, and the look Damien gave him when he materialized was not surprise. It was the look of a man who had expected exactly this, and was choosing not to spend time on it. Prior, Damien said to Calvin, low and without breaking stride. I heard, Calvin said. You were listening. I was doing my job. Delia glanced back at Calvin, and something moved across her face. Not hostility exactly, but the careful recalibration of someone adjusting to variables she hadn't planned for. How much did you get? Enough, Calvin said. The attorney? Greaves? Yes. I can reach him in 20 minutes. He's compromised. His personal cell, not the office line. There's a protocol. Calvin looked at Damien. If we're filing before 8, we need him awake and moving in the next 30. Damien said, make the call. Calvin peeled off toward a quieter section of the terminal, already dialing. They pushed through a set of glass doors into a connecting corridor, the kind of featureless airport artery that exists only to move people between places. No retail, no seating, just polished floors and overhead lighting and the faint smell of recycled air. Their footsteps echoed. The filing, Serafina said. Walk me through it. Delia glanced at her. The folder contains documented evidence of prosecutorial misconduct in a federal case. Specifically, evidence that Nathan Pryor received material from Steele's network prior to and during the cooperation proceedings, and that recording evidence was altered before entering the formal case record. She was speaking quickly, but clearly, the cadence of someone who had rehearsed this explanation in her head many times. If we file that evidence with the Office of Professional Responsibility and simultaneously deliver copies to 2 specific federal judges who are outside Pryor's jurisdiction chain, it triggers an automatic review that Pryor cannot intercept or delay. And that protects the cooperation agreement? Serafina asked. It doesn't protect it. It replaces it. An emergency motion to revalidate under uncorrupted judicial oversight. If the evidence is strong enough, and it is, the agreement gets reissued under new terms. Voss Capital's protections are reestablished. Pryor loses his leverage, and whoever he's working for loses their last viable move. Last viable move, Serafina repeated, meaning there are others. Delia was quiet for 1 step. 2. Then, there's a man named Garrett Finch. He's not in the folder, not yet, because I haven't been able to document him directly. But Finch is the architecture. Pryor is his mechanism inside the federal system. Steele was his mechanism inside Voss Capital, and Finch has been running both of them for 6 years. She paused. He doesn't like loose ends. And right now, Damien said, we're a loose end. You've been a loose end since you cooperated. The difference is that until tonight, Finch believed the compromised agreement gave him a controllable outcome. Pryor could revisit it at any time, apply pressure, keep you manageable. She looked at Damien. The folder changes that. If we file, Finch loses his control mechanism. You go from being a manageable asset to being an active threat. Which means he moves. Yes. Damien said nothing. Serafina watched him process it. She had spent 3 years watching him think, or trying to, through the managed opacity he usually maintained. And what she was watching now was different. Stripped. The executive stillness was there, but it was thinner, and underneath it she could see the actual mechanism. The fast, cold, forward-moving calculation of a man who was very good at being in danger and was shifting into the mode that good at danger required. She should have found it frightening. She found it, in some deeply inconvenient way clarifying. Calvin reappeared from a side corridor. Greaves is awake. He needs 40 minutes to prepare the documents for filing. He wants a secure location. The Meridian, Damien said immediately. 42nd floor. It's clean, it's mine, and security is controlled. Greaves is comfortable with that? He doesn't have to be comfortable. He has to file. Damien looked at Delia. Can you get us there? My car's in the rental lot. Then we move. They moved. The drive into the city took 23 minutes. Delia drove. Calvin rode in the front passenger seat, watching mirrors. Damien sat in the back with Serafina and the folder open across his knees, reading sections of it again under the inadequate interior light, occasionally asking Delia a question in a voice that was low and specific and utterly controlled, and she answered each one with the same clipped precision. Serafina sat beside him and watched the city come toward them through the windshield. Manhattan, at 1 a.m. on Christmas Day. The particular hollow brightness of it, the streets emptier than they ever were, the lights still going, the city still the city, indifferent to the specific texture of any given human crisis happening within it. She put her hand over her abdomen, brief, private, then moved it away. Later, she told herself. All of that is for later. The Meridian was a building she had been to twice, for Damien's board meetings, the kind of glass and steel tower that communicates seriousness through sheer unornamented height. The lobby security recognized Damien with the particular deference of people whose paychecks had a clear origin point. They were upstairs in 4 minutes. The 40th floor conference room was cold and dark until Calvin found the lights. A long table, chairs, a wall of windows showing the skyline. Damien was at the head of the table before anyone else had properly settled, the folder open, his jacket off, his sleeves pushed back with the efficient movements of someone transitioning from crisis to work. Greaves arrived 17 minutes later. He was 60, silver-haired, carrying a leather briefcase with the urgency of a man who had not had time to be afraid yet. He shook no hands. He sat. He looked at the folder for 4 minutes, reading fast, and then he looked at Delia and said, "This is solid." "Yes," she said. "The recording manipulation, you have the original file?" "On an encrypted drive." "Yes." "I need it." She produced it from her coat pocket without drama. He plugged it into a laptop, reviewed something, nodded. 60 minutes, he said. "You have 50, Damien said. Greaves looked at him for 1 second with the expression of a man who had been practicing law for 35 years and did not appreciate being given timelines. Then he opened the briefcase and began to work. Serafina stood at the window. The skyline looked the way it always looked, vast, indifferent, lit up for no reason other than its own persistence. She had stood at windows like this one a lot during her marriage, waiting, watching, trying to find something in the view that resolved the feeling of being adjacent to a life rather than inside one. She heard Damien come up behind her. He didn't touch her, just stood close enough that his presence was perceptible. "How are you doing?" he said. "I genuinely don't know." She paused. "How are you?" "Same." She turned and looked at him. Up close, in the harsh conference room light, he looked like someone who had been awake for a long time and was running on something beyond caffeine, something more like will, the specific will of a person who has decided that they are not going to fall apart until they have earned the right to. "When this is filed," she said, "what happens to Finch? We give Delia's research to the same judges. It doesn't indict him tonight, but it builds the foundation." He paused. "It's not over in a single filing." "But it started." "Yes." "And he knows it started." "By morning." "Yes." She looked at him. "And what does a man like Finch do when he realizes his mechanism has been pulled?" Damien met her eyes. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. She turned back to the window. They stood in silence for 30 seconds, which was not uncomfortable. It was a different kind of silence than the silences of their marriage. Those had been the silence of two people losing the thread. This was the silence of two people standing at the edge of something and knowing it. Then Calvin's phone rang. He answered, listened for 10 seconds. His face did not change, but his posture did. A subtle hardening, the shift from high alert to something beyond it. "Where?" he said. He listened. "How many?" He listened again. He hung up and looked at Damien. "Building lobby," he said. "Two men. They arrived 4 minutes ago and told lobby security they were federal agents. They are not federal agents." His voice was flat, informational. The voice of a man delivering a status report in the middle of a situation that is developing faster than anticipated. "They're asking for Mr. Voss by name." Serafina felt it move through her. Cold and immediate, a full-body recognition of danger that bypassed the rational mind entirely. Damien did not move. "Finch? Has to be. He moves fast. He had 4 hours of warning. If Pryor reached out at 9:15, he had time to position." Damien looked at the table, at Greaves, still working, apparently undisturbed, though his typing had slowed and she suspected he had heard every word. "How long?" "Greaves needs 30 more minutes minimum," Calvin said. "The lobby buys us maybe 10 before they find another way in." "Can you hold the lobby, with two of us against whatever Finch sends, for 10 minutes? A pause. "Maybe." Serafina turned from the window. "I can go down." Every head in the room turned. "They came for Damien," she said. "If I go to the lobby, as his wife, frantic, alone, and tell them he's not here, that we had a fight at the airport, that I have no idea where he went." She looked at Calvin. "It buys time." "Absolutely not," Damien said. "It's the logical play." "You are pregnant." "I am also the only person in this room who they're not looking for." Her voice was clear and hard. "I'm not a target. I'm a wife. If I go down there looking scared and confused, they spend time on me. That's time Greaves uses to finish." "Serafina." Damien's voice had dropped very low. The specific low of someone exercising enormous control over what they actually want to say. "I will not send you into a lobby with men who work for Garrett Finch. You're not sending me. I'm going. There is a difference between brave and what?" She crossed the room until she was 3 feet from him and looked up at him directly, the way she had stopped letting herself do during the marriage. "And what, Damien? Foolish? Reckless? Like cooperating with a compromised federal investigation? Like spending 2 years alone inside a problem that was destroying your marriage because you decided alone was safer?" She paused. "I'm not asking for your permission. I am telling you what makes tactical sense, which is what you would tell me if our positions were reversed." His jaw was locked. His eyes were on her face with an intensity that she felt physically, the specific pressure of being looked at by someone who is deciding something at speed that they do not want to decide. Calvin said, "She's right." Damien's gaze cut to him. "The play makes sense," Calvin said without apology. "She's unrecognizable to Finch's people. She has a credible reason to be in the building. If she can buy 15 minutes, 10 minutes, Greaves said without looking up from the laptop. "Give me 10. The room was quiet. Damien looked at Serafina. She looked back. "Stay in the lobby," he said finally, his voice stripped of everything except the actual words. "Public space, security cameras. The moment they show any aggression, you leave. You do not go with them for any reason. You do not let them separate you from the lobby floor." "Understood." "Serafina." "I understand." He looked at her for one more second. Something in his face that she would think about later. Not the fear this time, not the calculation, but something underneath both of those. Something that looked like a man who had spent 2 years protecting the wrong things, finally understanding which thing actually needed protecting. He reached out and adjusted the collar of her coat. One small, precise movement. Then he dropped his hand. "Go," he said. The elevator down was 30 seconds that felt longer. She watched the floor numbers descend and kept her breathing slow and deliberate, and thought about nothing except the lobby and the men in the lobby and the story she was about to perform. She was not a performer by nature. She was a person who had spent most of her adult life trying to be completely honest, which made the lying, when it came, feel strange and clean in equal measure. The lobby materialized around her as the doors opened. 2 men near the security desk, both in dark coats, both with the particular stillness of people who have been trained to appear casual and haven't quite mastered it. One was talking to the desk attendant, who looked uncomfortable. The other was facing the elevator bank. He saw her immediately. She kept her face exactly right. Distressed? Uncertain. a woman who had been crying recently and was trying to hold it together. She walked toward them with the specific energy of someone looking for help, which was not entirely a performance because her heart was hammering at a rate that was entirely genuine, and the cold sweat at the back of her neck was entirely genuine. And the thing moving through her chest right now that tasted like fear was entirely, "Mrs. Voss?" She stopped. Let her face do what it needed to do. "Yes? Have you seen my husband? We had a terrible fight at the airport and he left and I've been trying to reach him all night. His phone keeps going to voicemail." The man nearest to her looked at his partner. His partner looked at her. "Your husband isn't here, ma'am. I thought he might come here. He sometimes comes here when—" She let her voice break slightly, pressed her fingers to her mouth, let the pregnancy exhaustion and the genuine emotional wreckage of the night do the work that performance couldn't. "I've been trying to find him for 3 hours. I don't know what to do. We're having a baby, and tonight was just—" The two men exchanged another look. The calculation was visible, if you knew what you were looking at. She was not the target. She was a pregnant woman in distress on Christmas Eve. Pursuing her served nothing, but she was also a potential source of information, which meant they would not dismiss her immediately, which meant she had their attention, which meant— Upstairs, Greaves was typing. She kept talking. Let the words flow soft and desperate and real adjacent. The voice of a woman falling apart at the seams, which required almost no acting because the woman she was describing was not entirely fictional. She watched their faces. Watched the calculation continue. Watched the one nearest her decide she was worth a few more minutes. 8 minutes, she thought. Give me 8 more minutes. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She did not look at it. 5 minutes later, the elevator behind the two men opened. She saw it in their eyes before she heard anything. The shift of attention, a quick cut of their gaze past her shoulder toward the elevator bank. And then she heard it. The specific soft sound of elevator doors parting and footsteps, and Damien Voss's voice saying her name. But the voice was wrong. It was not the voice he had used upstairs. It was not the controlled, stripped-down voice of a man working a crisis. It was something else. Something that arrived in the lobby of a Manhattan high-rise at 2:17 a.m. on Christmas Day with the particular weight of a man who has run out of moves and decided that the last one available is also the most dangerous. She turned. Damien was standing at the elevator, jacket on, folder in hand, alone. No Calvin, no Delia. Just him. He looked at the two men with a directness that was not performance and not aggression and not negotiation. It was the specific directness of someone who has decided to make himself the target. "I'm here," he said to them. "Whatever Finch needs from me, we can talk about it right now." He paused. "Leave my wife out of it." The taller of the two men reached inside his coat. Serafina's breath stopped. She saw his hand emerge. Not a weapon. A phone. He raised it to his ear and said 3 words into it, and she did not catch the words, only the tone, the flat reporting tone of someone confirming a location. Then he lowered the phone, looked at Damien, and said, "Mr. Finch would like a word." Damien looked at Serafina across the lobby. 8 feet of polished floor between them. The lobby lights overhead. The Christmas tree in the corner with its timed lights still cycling through their slow sequence. The desk attendant frozen and terrified and trying very hard to be invisible. In Damien's face, she saw the plan. She saw it because she had spent 3 years learning to read him, and the last 6 hours finally understanding what she was reading, and what she saw was not surrender and not defeat, and not the recklessness of a man with nothing left. It was something that looked almost like the opposite. He looked at her for 1 second, one clean, unmanaged second. And what passed between them in that second was not words, and not strategy, and not 3 years of damage. It was something much simpler and much older than any of that. The specific communication of 2 people who have, finally, at the worst possible moment, arrived at the same place at the same time. Then he turned back to the man with the phone. "Tell Finch," Damien said, "that I'll meet him." A pause. "Tonight, his terms." Another pause, and his voice dropped to something that was very quiet and very clear and carried across the lobby without effort. "But I choose the location." The man looked at him, looked at his partner. His partner gave a small nod. He raised the phone again. And somewhere across the city, in a room Serafina had never seen, a man named Garrett Finch. The architecture, the thing behind the mechanisms, the name at the center of 2 years of damage, picked up the phone and listened. Whatever Finch said lasted 11 seconds. Then the man with the phone lowered it and looked at Damien and gave him an address in the meatpacking district and a time, 1 hour, and turned and walked out of the lobby with his partner without another word, the way people leave rooms when they work for someone who does not require them to make speeches. The lobby went quiet. The desk attendant exhaled audibly. Serafina crossed the floor to Damien in 8 steps and stopped in front of him and looked at his face and said, "The filing." "Done," he said. "Greaves finished 4 minutes ago. Both judges received copies simultaneously. The OPR filing went through at 2:11 a.m. Something in his face was different, not relief. The situation was too unresolved for relief. But the specific quality of a man who has completed an irreversible action and is now living in the world that action has created. It's filed. It exists. Whatever happens tonight, the record exists. So Finch already knows. Yes, that's why he agreed to the meeting. He agreed to the meeting, Damien said, because a man like Garrett Finch does not lose control of a situation without attempting to recover it face to face. He wants to assess the damage. He wants to look at me and determine whether there's still a move available to him. He paused. And there isn't, but he needs to confirm that himself. She looked at him. "You're going." "Yes." "Calvin. We'll be there. 2 federal contacts I've maintained outside Pryor's jurisdiction chain. Delia has their numbers. She's already made contact. They'll be positioned at the location before we arrive." He paused. "It's a controlled meet. Monitored. I am not walking into a room with Garrett Finch without documentation and witnesses." "That is not the same as safe." "No," he said. "It isn't." She held his gaze. Outside, through the lobby's glass facade, the city was doing what it always did. Indifferent, continuous, lit against the dark. And somewhere in the meatpacking district, a man named Garrett Finch was sitting with the knowledge that 2 years of careful architecture had been filed into a federal record in the middle of the night by a woman in a parking structure and a compromised lawyer who had found his conscience at 2 a.m. on Christmas Day, and he was deciding what to do with the 45 minutes he had left. "I'm coming," Serafina said. "No." "Damien, no?" His voice was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. It was the voice of someone who has used up the last of their negotiating flexibility and arrived at the place underneath it, the actual bedrock. "Not because I don't trust you, not because I'm managing you, because you are carrying our child, and I have already asked more of you tonight than I had any right to ask, and there are lines I will not cross regardless of the tactical logic." He looked at her. "This is one of them." She looked back at him, wanted to argue, found somewhere underneath the argument that she understood him. Not agreed with. Understood. The specific, irreducible difference. "Delia stays with you," he said. "Here. I want you on the 42nd floor with the door locked until Calvin calls and tells you it's done." "And if Calvin doesn't call?" He didn't answer that. She hadn't expected him to. "Go," she said. He looked at her one more time, the same way he had looked at her in the lobby before he stepped forward, that one clean, unmanaged second, the thing beneath everything else. And then he walked to the elevator, and the doors closed, and he was gone. Delia appeared from the corridor behind the security desk, where she had apparently been standing for some time. She looked at Serafina with the expression of a woman who had spent 8 months inside a dangerous situation and had developed a very accurate radar for when something mattered. "Upstairs?" she said. "Upstairs," Serafina said. The 42nd floor conference room felt different with 3 fewer people in it. Greaves had packed his briefcase and gone. His job was done. The filing was complete. He had the particular urgency of a man who wanted several hundred miles between himself and whatever came next. The table still held the remnants of the night's work. Water glasses, Delia's folder, a legal pad covered in Damien's handwriting that Serafina had not seen him use. She sat at the table and looked at the legal pad. His handwriting was small and precise. She had always known this about him, had watched him take notes in the margins of newspapers and on the backs of envelopes, and once, memorably, on the inside cover of a novel she had been reading, which had annoyed her enormously at the time, and which she had thought about often in the months since as a specific piece of evidence of a life that had been shared. The notes on the pad were not personal. They were case-related. Names, numbers, a timeline of the filing sequence. But the handwriting was his, and it was 3 a.m. on Christmas Day, and she was 42 floors above Manhattan waiting to find out whether her husband came home from a meeting with a man who had spent 2 years trying to destroy him. Delia made coffee from the credenza machine in the corner, set a cup in front of Serafina without asking, sat across from her. "The baby," Delia said. Serafina looked at her. "How far along?" 6 weeks. Approximately. Delia nodded. She wrapped both hands around her own cup. "I've been watching your husband for 8 months," she said, "from a distance mostly, through documents and surveillance logs and testimony transcripts." She paused. "He's not what I expected when I started." "What did you expect?" "Someone who cooperated with federal investigators because it was the most strategically advantageous exit from an untenable position." She looked at the table. "What I found, when I went deeper, was someone who cooperated because the alternative was becoming something he'd decided he wasn't willing to become." She paused again. "There's a difference. It doesn't show up in the documents easily, but it's there if you look." Serafina looked at the legal pad. "He talked about you," Delia said, "in the wire recordings. Not directly. He was careful. He knew he was being recorded. But there are these moments in the middle of case discussions where something would come up that connected to his personal life, and you could hear it in his voice." She met Serafina's eyes. "He was trying to get home. That's the only way I know how to describe it. Everything he was doing, and every compromise and sacrifice and risk, was oriented in the direction of getting back to something." A pause. "Someone." Serafina was quiet. Her chest hurt. She was so tired of her chest hurting, but this was a different hurt than the one she had been carrying for 3 years. That one had been the hurt of a wound that was not being treated. This one was something else. The hurt of a wound that was finally being looked at directly. Exposed to air. The specific pain of the moment before something begins to heal. Calvin called at 3:47 a.m. Serafina picked up before the first ring finished. "It's done," he said. She closed her eyes. "Finch, in federal custody. 2 agents from the Oversight Division, Delia's contacts, were present for the entire meeting. Finch made statements in front of witnesses that, combined with the filed evidence, are going to constitute the foundation of a case that will take him apart entirely." Calvin paused. He didn't expect the agents to be there. He thought he was meeting Damien alone. When he understood the situation, A brief pause. "He's not a man who handles surprises gracefully. And Damien, talking to the agents now. He'll be another hour at minimum." Another pause. Briefer. "He's fine, Mrs. Voss. He's completely fine." She pressed her fingers against her eyes, did not cry. Almost. "Thank you, Calvin," she said. She lowered the phone and looked at Delia across the table and said, "It's done." Delia exhaled through her nose, long and slow. 8 months of work leaving her body in a single breath. She looked suddenly exhausted. The specific exhaustion of someone who has been running on urgency for so long that when it stops, the weight of it lands all at once. "What will you do now?" Serafina asked. Delia considered the question. "Sleep," she said. "For about a week." She paused. "Then probably write up everything I have on Finch's broader network and give it to people who can do something with it." She looked at Serafina. "There are others connected to what Finch built. It doesn't end with one arrest." "Does it ever?" "No," Delia said simply. "But you make it harder for the next one. That's the work." They sat in the early morning quiet of a conference room 42 floors up, while the city continued its indifferent existence below them. And Serafina thought about that. The work. The ongoing, unglamorous, structurally imperfect work of trying to make things slightly less broken than you found them. No clean endings, no final victories. Just the accumulated weight of choices made in the right direction, one at a time, in the dark, without guarantee. She thought she understood, for the first time, what Damien had been doing for 2 years. Not well. Not wisely. Not in a way that had not cost them both enormously, but in the right direction. Damien arrived at 5:12 a.m. She heard the elevator before she heard him. The soft hydraulic sound of it arriving, the doors opening, and then his footsteps on the corridor floor, and then the conference room door. He looked like a man who had been awake for 24 hours and had spent the last 2 of them in the middle of something that had required everything he had. His jacket was gone. His shirt was untucked on one side. There was a small cut above his left eyebrow that had been cleaned but not covered. Something had happened at the meeting that Calvin had described as Finch not handling surprises gracefully, and she understood now what that had looked like physically. He stopped in the doorway, looked at her. She stood up. Delia, without being asked, picked up her folder and her coat and said, "I'll give you a minute," and walked past Damien into the corridor and pulled the door closed behind her. In the silence, Damien crossed the room and sat in the chair across from where Serafina was standing and put his elbows on the table and his face in his hands and stayed there for a long moment, not performing, not managing, just sitting with the weight of the night pressing down on him now that the urgency was gone and there was nothing left to navigate through. She sat back down. She waited. After a long time, he lowered his hands and looked at her. "It's over," he said. "I know. All of it. Finch, Pryor, the exposure. The agreement holds. It'll be revalidated under clean oversight within 30 days. He paused. "There are no more threats I haven't told you about." "I know," she said again. He looked at the table. "I spent 2 years," he said slowly, "building a structure designed to protect you. And the structure was faulty from the beginning because it was built on a foundation of keeping you outside it." He paused. "I kept telling myself I would tell you when it was over, that you would be safer not knowing, that I could handle it alone." Another pause. "I think I understood somewhere around month 14 that I was also keeping you outside it, because if you knew and the worst happened anyway, if something happened to you despite everything I was doing, I would not have been able to survive that." She listened. "So I managed the risk by managing the distance," he said, "and the distance became the damage." He looked up at her. "I know that's not an excuse. I know that understanding why you did something wrong doesn't make it right. I want you to know that every wrong thing I did came from the same place." He stopped. "From you." The conference room was very quiet. Outside the windows, the sky over Manhattan was doing the thing it does in the hour before dawn. Not lightning yet, not quite, but changing texture, the darkness becoming slightly less absolute, the city below shifting from the orange-black of deep night towards something grayer and more tentative. "The pregnancy test on your desk," she said. "Yes?" "You found it and came to the airport." "I found it and I—" He stopped, started again. "I found it and for about 10 seconds I couldn't breathe. And then I could. And the only thought I had was that I was not going to let you get on that plane without knowing everything." He paused. "Not for the baby. I need you to know it wasn't only because of the baby. I had been trying to find the right moment for weeks. The moment to tell you what was actually happening. And I kept not finding it because the right moment doesn't exist. When you've been silent for 2 years, there is no version of it that doesn't require you to simply start talking and accept whatever it costs." He looked at her. "The test made me stop calculating the cost." She picked up the legal pad, looked at his handwriting, set it down. "The ranch," she said. "It's real." "The studio. North-facing skylights, the way you described it." He paused. "February 2021. We were at dinner at the place on Columbus, the one with the bad service and the good bread. You were talking about what it would take to actually work seriously on your painting again, and you described, very specifically, the quality of light you would need." He paused. "I remembered." "You built it from that." "Yes." She sat with that for a moment. The specific, unbearable tenderness of it. A man who had remembered a single sentence said at a dinner 4 years ago and built a room from it while his marriage was disintegrating around him. As an act of faith in a future he was terrified he had already destroyed. "The nursery," she said. "I had it designed 8 months ago. I didn't know." He was quiet. I had it designed because I needed to believe there was something to come back to." She pressed her lips together. "Damien, I know. You cannot do this again." Her voice was not angry. It was something harder and more important than angry. It was clear. The specific clarity of someone who has been through something and come out the other side, knowing exactly where the lines are. Whatever comes next, whatever difficulty or danger or situation you decide requires protection, I'm not someone you protect by excluding. You do not get to make decisions about what I can handle. You do not get to calculate the distance between us as a safety measure. She looked at him directly. If you have a problem, I am your partner. That means I carry it with you, or I don't carry anything at all. He held her gaze. Yes. I mean it. I know you mean it. He paused. I mean, yes. She nodded. Outside, the sky had shifted another degree toward morning. 2 weeks, she said. He looked at her. You asked for 2 weeks, she said. At the airport, to show me what you've been building, to try. She held his gaze. I'm still saying yes to that. Something moved across his face. Not relief exactly, not the release of tension, but something quieter and more fundamental than that. Like a door opening in a room that had been sealed for a very long time. Okay, he said. But the papers aren't going anywhere, she said. They exist. I signed them. If 2 weeks goes by and I determine that this, she gestured between them, is not something I can come back to, those papers get filed and we do this the right way, and we make sure this child has 2 parents who are honest with each other, even if they're not together. Understood. I am not staying because I'm pregnant. I know. I'm staying because I want to know if what you've been building is real. Because tonight changed things enough that I owe us both the chance to find out. She paused. And because somewhere in the last 5 hours I remembered that I loved you for specific reasons, and those reasons did not disappear just because you handled everything wrong. He was very still. That's not a promise, she said. It's an honesty. It's enough, he said. It's more than enough. They sat across the table from each other as the sky outside continued its slow transformation, and neither of them tried to fill the silence. And the silence was not comfortable exactly, but it was honest, which was something they had not had in a very long time, and which was, it turned out, worth more than comfortable. Delia drove them to the ranch at dawn. It was a 2-hour drive north and west, out of the city and through the suburbs and into the kind of landscape that arrives gradually. The density thinning, the sky widening, the light changing quality as the buildings stopped competing with it. They drove mostly in silence. Serafina sat in the back with Damien, not touching, the folder and the legal pad and the remnants of the night between them, and watched the countryside arrive. She fell asleep somewhere around the hour mark. When she woke, the sun was up, and the car was on a smaller road lined with bare winter trees, and Damien was awake beside her, watching the road, and when he noticed she was awake, he said nothing, just looked at her briefly with that look, the one she was still learning to read correctly, and turned back to the window. The ranch was not what she had imagined from the word ranch, which had conjured something more theatrical. It was a low-profile property set back from a lake, the lake a flat pewter in the morning light, with a main house built of weathered wood and stone, modest-scaled, the kind of building that looked like it had grown from the ground rather than been placed on it. There were trees. There was quiet. The lake was close enough that she could hear it when she got out of the car. Calvin had arrived ahead of them and had the heat running. The main house was warm and spare and real. Not staged, not designed to impress, just a livable space that showed evidence of someone having thought carefully about how people actually inhabit a place. A kitchen with a long wooden table, a reading room with built-in shelves already partially filled, firewood stacked by a hearth. She walked through it slowly. Then she found the studio, north-facing, as described. A room that caught the morning light at an angle that turned it particular. Not yellow, not white, but a quality of illumination that her painter's eye recognized immediately as the kind that tells the truth about color. 2 large skylights, a work table built to the right height, shelves empty and waiting. The smell of fresh wood and something mineral, like cold air that had been let in and then sealed. She stood in the doorway for a long time, heard Damien come up behind her, felt him stop at the threshold. You remembered that dinner, she said. I remember most things you say. He paused. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know it. She stepped into the studio, walked to the center of it, and looked up at the skylights and the morning sky beyond them, pale and clear and enormous. I want to work again, she said. It surprised her how simply it came out, how certain. 3 years of pushing it aside, letting it go quiet, deciding there would be time later. And here was the room that made later feel real. Then work. he said. She looked at him from across the studio. He was standing in the doorway with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on her face, and he looked, not repaired, that was too simple, too clean, but honest. For the first time in 3 years, entirely, uncomplicatedly honest. She thought about the text message. You should have gotten on that plane. Whoever Delia was, whatever her calculation had been in sending it, the message had been wrong. Not maliciously, just wrong. Because the plane would have taken her to a clean start in a city with no memory of this, which was not the same thing as healing. The clean start would have been its own kind of lie, a different management strategy, a different way of not finishing something. She walked to the nursery last. It was at the far end of the house, a room that received late afternoon light through a window that looked toward the lake. It was painted a soft, serious gray, not a baby color, or not only a baby color, but a color that could grow with a person, that could be many things across many years. There was a crib, unassembled, leaning in parts against one wall, waiting. There was a chair by the window. She sat in the chair, looked at the crib parts, looked at the lake through the glass. Damien appeared in the doorway of this room too, and this time he didn't stay at the threshold. He walked into the room and crouched in front of the crib parts, and picked up 2 of the pieces and looked at them with the particular expression of a man examining something he intends to figure out. And after a moment he set them down and looked at her. I don't know how to put a crib together, he said. I know. I'll learn. She looked at him. This was the man. This was the actual man. Not the corporate structure, not the crisis manager, not the disciplined, controlled executive who had become a stranger across 3 years of managed distance. This was the person she had caught in fragments across 4 years of knowing him. The man who stole sips of her sweet coffee and folded newspapers into 2-inch squares and remembered sentences she'd said at dinner about the quality of light in a room she wanted to work in. This man had made catastrophic choices, had carried a 2-year secret that had cost them both something they could not get back, had operated from a fear so large it had disguised itself as strength, and had also, in the middle of all of that, bought a piece of land by a lake and built a studio from a description of light she had given him at dinner in February 2021. Loving someone, she thought, is not a conclusion. It is not a thing you decide once and then have. It is a choice made continuously in the direction of another specific, irreplaceable, catastrophically imperfect person in full knowledge of the cost. She was not ready to say she was staying. She was not ready to say she was not. What she was ready to say, looking at Damien Voss crouching on the floor of an unfinished nursery at 7 in the morning on Christmas Day with crib parts in his hands and the lake behind her and the studio down the hall and 6 weeks of new life making themselves known in the very specific language of her own body, what she was ready to say was this: "Let me show you how." He looked up at her. She got up from the chair and sat on the floor beside the crib parts and picked up the instruction sheet that had been folded and placed beneath one of the slats, and she unfolded it and smoothed it against the floor and looked at it. He sat beside her. Their shoulders touched. Neither of them moved away. Outside, the lake caught the morning light and threw it back up at the sky in long, flat plains of silver and pale gold, and the trees stood bare and patient along the shore, and the world was very quiet. And somewhere in a federal processing facility, Nathan Pryor was being walked through an intake procedure that would define the rest of his professional life. And somewhere else, Garrett Finch was sitting in a room, understanding that the architecture he had built across 6 years had been disassembled in a single night by a woman in a parking structure and a man who had finally, at the very last moment, stopped trying to carry everything alone. And in a room at the end of a ranch house by a lake, 2 people sat on the floor with an instruction sheet between them and the pieces of something waiting to be built. And the morning came in through the window, and it was enough. 6 months later, in a different light, the golden sideways light of a late afternoon in June, family and a small number of friends gathered at the edge of that same lake for a ceremony with no officiants, no formal program, and chairs that had been arranged and then rearranged twice because Serafina had changed her mind about the angle. She was visibly pregnant. 7 months, and she carried it the way she carried most things, without making it smaller than it was, without performing it larger. She had gone back and forth on the ceremony, had argued against it twice, on the grounds that a vow renewal felt like an announcement of something that should be allowed to simply exist without a ceremony attached. Damien had said, with the new honesty she was still getting used to receiving from him, "I want to say it out loud. I want there to be a record of it, not for anyone else, for me." So there was a ceremony. There was no script. They had agreed on that. Whatever they said, they would say it without having written it down first. Damien spoke first. He did not speak well. He was not a natural orator, and he knew it, and he stood with the lake behind him in his plain dark suit, and he looked at her and he said, in the voice she had been learning to recognize as the bedrock voice, the one without management or performance or strategy, "I spent 3 years making the wrong choice about how to protect you. I thought protecting you meant keeping you away from what was dangerous. I know now that protecting you means standing close enough that we carry it together. I won't get that wrong again." He paused. "I choose this. Every day. Starting today. I choose this." She did not cry. She came close. She spoke second. She had thought about what she wanted to say for 6 months, which meant she had thought about it too much, which meant she abandoned all of it when the moment arrived and said the thing that was simply true. "I left you because I thought you had stopped showing up. I know now that you were showing up in the only way you knew how, which was the wrong way. And I am here because the man who built a room full of north-facing light from a dinner conversation 4 years ago is the same man who stood in a terminal at midnight and let me decide. And that man, that specific man, is the one I want to spend my life arguing with and forgiving and being completely honest with, even when it costs us both." She paused. "Don't make me regret it." Paused. "Don't make me." Someone laughed. Several people. The kind of laughter that comes from relief as much as humor. Damien's mouth did something that was not quite a smile but occupied the same general territory. They did not exchange rings because they had never taken them off. Their daughter arrived on a Wednesday morning in September. Labor was 15 hours, which Damien spent mostly in a chair beside the hospital bed, holding Serafina's hand with a grip that she later described as genuinely concerning, and which he later described as appropriate to the circumstances. They named her Ilara. She had Serafina's coloring and, in the first weeks, an expression of general dissatisfaction with her environment that Serafina said was clearly Damien's contribution. On the first night home from the hospital, they put Ilara in the crib they had assembled together on Christmas morning and stood on opposite sides of it, looking down at her. And she was making the small involuntary movements of a sleeping newborn, the fists clenching and unclenching, the breathing slightly uneven, the absolute completeness of someone who has not yet learned that the world is complicated. "She looks like she's arguing with someone," Damien said. "She's 3 days old. She's already opinionated. I wonder where she gets that." He looked up at Serafina across the crib. She looked back. Outside the window of the nursery, the September dark was clear and full of stars, and the lake was a dark mirror below them, and the studio was waiting down the hall with its north-facing skylights and its empty shelves. And somewhere in a federal courthouse, Nathan Pryor was entering a guilty plea that would take 3 days to process and a year to formally conclude. And Garrett Finch was in a holding facility working through the specifics of a case that Delia Shand's documentation had made essentially indefensible, and the agreement that had cost 2 years of a marriage was being revalidated under clean judicial oversight. And all of it was real, and none of it was simple, and the cost of it had been enormous and was not fully tallied yet, and probably never would be. And in the nursery, in the quiet, Damien reached across the crib and Serafina met him halfway, and he took her hand, and they stood like that for a long time, not talking, just present, while their daughter slept between them and the stars went on doing what stars do, which is shine without knowing anything about the dark they're pushing back against. "That is enough," she thought. "That is exactly enough." And it was.